Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for this lecture series on domestic and international arbitration. This lecture series has been organized by Prudentia and Partners, LIKE Legal Information Knowledge and Expression, in association with Center for Research in International and Comparative Law, MNLU Aurangabad, and LegitQuest is the knowledge partner along with LegitEye as the media partner. Prudentia and Partners, founded in 2016, is one of the fastest growing law firms in Delhi, equipped with a very versatile team of attorneys dedicated to provide best services in a wide range of legal services across various sectors such as civil, criminal, matrimonial, electricity, telecom, environmental, banking, and commercial litigation. LIKE is an online one-stop solution for all the updates of the legal world, with a goal to provide a platform to other budding brightest legal minds and ignite the culture of debate and deliberations across the fraternity. Maharashtra National Law University Aurangabad is an institution established in the year 2017 with an objective of imparting quality legal education. LegitQuest is an artificial intelligence-based legal research product. It is a state-of-the-art legal research platform for conducting legal research and is very well known for the introduction of the world's only one-click insight system called the iDraft Case Analytics. In short, the iDraft feature powered by artificial intelligence takes out the issues, facts, arguments, reasoning, and decision of a case law. LegitQuest has recently started with LegitEye, which has the latest news, interviews, and columns and serves the stakeholders of judiciary. Now, moving forward, our today's topic is the formation of an arbitration agreement, power of the courts to refer the parties to arbitration, and allied concepts. And I am deeply honored to have Mr. Aishwari Vikram as our esteemed speaker today. Mr. Vikram practices in the field of land acquisition, arbitration, intellectual property rights, insolvency and bankruptcy law, service law, law against sexual harassment, consumer protection law, and real estate law. His fora of practice include the Supreme Court of India, Delhi High Court, district courts in Delhi, NCLT, NCLAT, NCDRC. In the past, he has been in association with Chaudhar Amarchand Mangaldas, where he was working in the litigation team, dealing with privacy laws, arbitration, and insolvency laws. He's currently working with Mr. Amit Sigbal, senior advocate, and has assisted him in a wide variety of matters. Along with his professional commitments, he has a keen interest in academics. He has various publications in reputed journals such as in Niti Aayog Journal of Law and Policy and International Journal of Commerce and Social Sciences. At present, he's also editor and on the advisory board of two reputed journals on law and policy and transnational commercial laws. So before we start, let me brief you all that today's session will be for 45 minutes followed by Q&A. I would humbly request all our participants to please be on mute and without video throughout the call. And all questions to the speaker can be written in the chat box, which will be taken at the end of the session if the time permits. So we seem to be all set. I would now hand over to Mr. Vikram now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So today, can you just upload the slides so that things are in order? So today, in general, we are going to discuss three sections of the Arbitration Act. That will be Section 5, Section 8, and Section 7. This will cover two things for you. Number one, what is the extent the court will intervene in an ongoing or in a award passed by the arbitrator. Second is what is an arbitration agreement, what are the relevant things into it, what is the form of arbitration agreement, how it's being done, conducted. We will analyze in this regard Section 7 of the Arbitration Act. So let's start with the first slide. That I think it's the earlier one. You have skipped one, I guess. Yeah. So see, there are two sections which are very relevant and has to be understood in a context. That is Section 5 and Section 8. Now, what is the extent of judicial intervention? That has been provided under Section 5, which says, notwithstanding anything contained in any other law for the time being in force in matter governed by this part means part 1. No judicial authority shall intervene except where so provided in this part, meaning thereby that where the Arbitration Act provides a mechanism wherein the judiciary can intervene or the judicial authority can intervene, only there the power can be exercised by the courts. Let's take an example. If a award is passed, it is to be enforced by a party and it is challenged before the court under Section 34 of the Arbitration Act, then it is provided under the Act itself. So the court at that point of time can intervene. Second example is section 9. Supposedly the arbitration has not yet started. Only the arbitration proceeding, as I told you earlier, that arbitration proceeding starts when the date for appointment of arbitrator, the letter is received by the other side. That is the initiation of the arbitration, commencement of the arbitration process. If a section 9 is filed, then again a section 9 provision is provided under part 1 of the act, and therefore the court can exercise jurisdiction. Third thing, section 37 of the arbitration act, which provides for appeal against an order passed in a section 34 proceeding and other orders. For example, section 9 proceeding, any order that is passed is appealable under section 37. So in this context also, there is a legal framework provided by the act, and it is only in pursuance of this framework that the court can intervene in an arbitration proceeding. Now, we will understand this section a little later in greater detail, but we should also see section 8. Now, supposedly, yesterday I gave you an example. Supposedly, there's an arbitration agreement entered between party A and party B, and there's a breach of that agreement. I want to enforce the arbitration agreement, and the other party, instead of enforcing the arbitration agreement through arbitration channel, goes to a court of law and says and files a suit saying that this particular agreement is void, it's bad, it's gone, it's invalid under the eye of law. What will be the recourse then? Because the law shouldn't presume and shouldn't have a mechanism wherein two parallel proceedings are running, one private, the other one public through courts. That cannot be the objective of the law. And precisely because of this reason, Section 8 has been made by the legislature. Now, Section 8 is very important and it is widely discussed. There are too many cases on this, which we are going to touch today, a few of them. So let's see and understand the framework of Section 8. Now, the first clause says a judicial authority before which an action is brought in a matter which is subject of an arbitration agreement shall. Now, mark the word used is shall. If a party to the arbitration or any other person claiming or under him so applies not later than the date of submitting his first statement on the substance of the dispute. Now, mark two words here. I think two expressions should be marked altogether. First is that a party to the arbitration agreement or any person claiming through or under him. Mark this expression because I'll tell you the reason later in the next slide. But as of now, just mark this expression. Then so applies not later than the date of submitting his first statement on the substance of the dispute. Now it doesn't say WS, it doesn't say written statement, it says first statement on the substance of the dispute. So this is also very important. I'll tell you later why. Then, notwithstanding any judgment, decree, or order of the Supreme Court or any other court, refer the parties to arbitration unless it finds that prima facie no valid arbitration agreement exists. So, see the limited ground which has been given to the court to decide that it will only not refer the parties to the arbitration if it finds prima facie no valid arbitration agreement exists. This is the sole ground provided, right? Now let's see subclause 2. Now when an application is made under subclause 1, the original arbitration agreement or duly certified copy thereof has to be given to the court. Now this is important. Third thing is that provided that where the original arbitration or certified copy is not there with the party may request the court. I'm not reading the section, I'm telling you my opinion. The party may request the court by a petition praying that the other side be directed to produce the original arbitration agreement or duly certified copy of it. The last one is that notwithstanding anything under subclause 1, even though a proceeding is pending before the judicial authority, an arbitration may be commenced or continued and award be made. Means irrespective that there is a challenge made before the court under section 8, still you can continue with arbitration and move on. Now On next slide, we will discuss the relevant aspects involved in this particular section. Next slide, please.
So just give me a second.
Yeah, take your time. So see, I'll just repeat myself again on this. Number one, you have to appreciate that the word used is parties claiming through or under him. This is significant and I'll tell you why. Okay, now the next slide is here. Now, why is it significant? I'll tell you. Now, yesterday I was talking to you about the group of companies doctrine. Now, that seems to be a very good concept applicable in international law, and it was there in the Indian Arbitration Act 1996, but was applicable only to international arbitrations, which were foreign arbitrations under Section 45. And I'll tell you why. See, before the amendment of 2015 brought to Section 8, this on the left hand side, if you will see, the subclause 1 is the earlier subsection of Section 8. Now, see, the word if any party so applies was only there, meaning thereby that any party claiming under him or through him was missing absolutely. Just read the section carefully prior to amendment. This is before the 2015 amendment. Now, just compare it with the international scenario. The international scenario being part 2 arbitrations, which seats are there in foreign. Just appreciate this particular line that is provided under section 45. Shall at the request of one or any party or any person claiming through or under him. Meaning thereby that section 45 earlier provided the expression earlier, meaning thereby it still provides that any person claiming through or under him, this expression was provided, and this is only the expression wherein the group of companies doctrine can fit in. Means that a person who is a party to the arbitration agreement, not only he has a right to enforce that agreement, but also persons who are claiming through him, they will also have a right to they will also have a right to enforce that particular agreement under section 45. This particular expression was missing under section 8 before the 2015 amendment, meaning that group of companies doctrine, although it could have applied to section 45, means international arbitrations having the seat outside India, but it could not have been applied to section 8 in the domestic arbitration. Then came the Law Commission of India. Law Commission of India in the 246th report stated that the words such of the parties to the arbitration claiming under him or as is provided under section 45, those same words should be used under section 8. And therefore section 8 was amended in the year 2016 by an amendment act 3 of 2016 with effect from 2015, and this particular word was added that if a party to the arbitration agreement or any person claiming through or under him. Thus now, because of the addition of these words, the group of company doctrine is now applicable to domestic arbitrations. Next slide, please. I think there's some problem. Hello.
So is it okay?
Yeah,
We're so
absolutely.
sorry for this, sir.
No, no, it's okay. No worries. It's
Let me start the
technology
slide.
all the time.
So is it okay, this slide?
The next slide, please.
Next slide.
I think this is done. Now, these are the important case laws on the group of company doctrines, and I'll just tell you the relevant aspect which was involved in this and how it was interpreted. Now, as I earlier told you that Section 45 had that expression and Section 8 didn't before the 2015 amendment. So, if you see these all cases 2008, 2005, 2013, 2000, except for 2018 and 19, all these cases were before the 2015 amendment, and that's why there is a specific interpretation of these sections made into the judgment. Now, first was Sumitomo Corporation versus CTC Finance Services. Now, in this case, what happened is that there was a particular arbitration, international arbitration, and the court in this case said that group of companies doctrine, though the word was not used as such, but the court said that word person, which is defined parties, which is defined under section 2h of the arbitration act, means parties who are persons signing the arbitration agreement. Therefore, any party who is not a signatory of the arbitration agreement, even under section 45, which even though use the word that persons claiming through or under, the court didn't refer to that. The court only said that the word parties means signatory, and therefore any non-signatory cannot be referred to arbitration even under section 45 of the Arbitration Act. This was the first judgment on this particular aspect. Now we come to the Indian context. Sukanya Holdings versus Jayesh H. Pandya. Now, this is a 2005 judgment. What happened in this one is that there was a particular partnership. Now, one of the partners gave a part in the partnership to a third person. The other partners filed a suit for dissolution of partnership. Now, this was objected, saying that the partnership contains a particular clause which provides that the disputes will be referred to arbitration, and hence the suit is not maintainable. Now, the matter was first decided in the trial court level under Section 8, then it went to appeal in High Court, and ultimately it went to before the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court said that this particular doctrine that persons who are not signatories to an arbitration agreement can also be made a party under arbitration agreement is not there. The court also added that if a suit is filed and the subject matter of the suit is large, meaning thereby it also contains aspects which cannot be a part of the arbitration agreement or which are not in fact a part of the arbitration agreement, in that case the suit will be maintainable and the arbitration has to be discouraged because the court believes in non-bifurcation of proceedings. Therefore, the court said that we are not going to refer the matter to the arbitration, we are going to decide it through the suit. Now, in that, interestingly, there was a second observation made by the court as well. The court said that parties to an arbitration are those who are signatories. If in section 8 it is found that one of the parties is a necessary party, made a necessary party in arbitration, and it is not a signatory, then the only recourse is to file a suit and not go for arbitration. That is Sukanya Holdings Private Limited, meaning thereby that this court also, as such, disregarded the principle of group companies doctrine. Now, if you remember in the last slide, I showed you that the 246 Law Commission report, which suggested the expression to be added in Section 8, that is, people claiming under him or through the parties, this particular expression was similar to Section 45 of the Arbitration Act. And the reason suggested by the Law Commission to add this particular provision was because of this case, Sukanya Holdings. Now let's come to Chloro Control India Private Limited. This is important because this is one of the first cases that recognized group of companies doctrine, applied it, pointed out the particular features which has to be applied. What are the criteria when you will say that group of company doctrines can be applied in this case? So these are provided to you on the left hand side. If you see, first is what the court will see if there are, supposedly there are two situations. Number one, there are multiple agreements. Few agreements have an arbitration clause. Other agreements don't have an arbitration clause. Or it may so happen that there is one agreement or two agreements in which arbitration clause exists, but the parties against whom you are claiming your rights under arbitration is not a signatory to the arbitration agreement. So these two scenarios can take place. Now, in order to solve these two scenarios, the court has laid down certain tests so that the group of company doctrines, which has its evolution from Dow Chemicals that we discussed yesterday, the ICC award, is now realized and affected too in India. Now, what are these three tests, four tests? Let's see. Intention to bind non-signatory group of companies has to be shown, meaning thereby that through the facts as well as through the agreement, it has to be shown that even though one party is not a signatory to it, but it was his stand also, and it was my understanding also that he should be a part of this arbitration agreement. So the intention of the parties is primary. It has to be shown first. And this is the most important requirement under the Cloro control tests that have been laid. The second is that the non-signatory company has to first been engaged in the negotiation of performance or the termination of the contract. Means a company which is a non-signatory has to be an active part of that transaction. It has to be there in negotiation or performance or termination of the contract. So this is the second requirement. Alternatively, the sub part of the second requirement is make statement expressing his intention to be bound by the contract, meaning thereby that supposedly I'm not able to show, though my intentions are clear, his intention is clear, I'm not able to show that he was a part of negotiation, performance or termination. Even if I show his statement in any of the proceedings, or if he consents before the court that he wants to be a part of this arbitration agreement, then he can be referred to arbitration, though he is a non-signatory. Third test is that a non-signatory, I think the word has been repeated twice, a non-signatory has a direct relationship with the signatory in a composite transaction. Now, in Dow Chemicals, if you remember, what was the facts? There was a parent company, there was a subsidiary company. The subsidiary companies entered into various agreements with third parties, but it was for the benefit, and the disputes and the whole transaction revolved not only between the subsidiary companies and third party, but also with the parent company. And therefore the court allowed its jurisdiction, saying that even though you are right that companies are different, there is some corporate personality, corporate veil cannot be lifted, but we have to see the total and the whole transaction to understand it. And that is the relationship that has to be seen between a signatory and a non-signatory party. The last thing is the true essence of the business transaction and organization structure has to be seen. This was one of the best tests that was applied in Amit Lalchand Shah case, which I will be dealing now. Now, as you recall, and as I have told you before, that those particular words were absent in section 8. Now, chloro control, there's an interesting para given by the judges, which says that there is a difference between section 8 and section 45. Whatever I told you earlier, that was the same thing was pointed out by the judges. But the judges were pointing out in a different context. The argument raised was that group of company doctrine cannot apply to international arbitration because it is inapplicable to domestic arbitration under section 8. Then the court read Section 8 and Section 45 parallelly and said that, see, Section 45 has a much wider scope and therefore it will apply. Though it may not apply in the domestic arbitration, but it will apply in international arbitration. Now, after the amendment took place and the matter was now decided in the context of domestic arbitration in 2018 by Amit Lalchand Shah case, the court made it clear that this doctrine will also apply to domestic arbitrations, because now there is no difference between Section 45 and Section 8 in context of the parties who can claim the enforcement of arbitration agreement. Now, what happened in Amit Lal Chand's case is that there were 4 agreements. Now, few of the agreements had an arbitration clause, the other didn't. Now, the parties who were signatory to the arbitration clause, to the agreements wherein there was no arbitration clause, they said that we are not bound by arbitration and we are not going to submit ourselves to arbitration. Now, the matter came up before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that, see, this is a composite transaction. These all agreements are interrelated with each other. They can't have their separate existence. And therefore, all the tests that are provided under the chloro control case, which relates to foreign arbitration, will also apply to domestic arbitration, as now there is no change between Section 8 and Section 45, and therefore the court applied it to the Indian law. The last case is Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited versus Canara Bank and others, wherein the court has affirmed this particular concept that was given in Amit Lalchand Shah case and Chloro Control case. Next slide, please. Now, that was regarding group of companies doctrine. Now let's come to anti-arbitration injunction. But before that, let's just take a small break of 15 seconds. I'll just rejoin in 15 seconds. Yeah. So we have discussed, I think the slides have disappeared again. Yeah. So we have discussed the group of companies doctrines. Now let's refresh our mind again, because if you go through all these cases, then you have to ultimately analyze each and everything. It's not so easily available on the internet, what I have explained you earlier. So now let's come to anti-arbitration injunction. Now, what is an anti-arbitration injunction? It's very clear. Anti-arbitration injunction is an injunction ordered by the court which seeks to prevent the initiation or continuation of the arbitration proceedings. Now, there are two things: initiation and continuation of arbitration proceeding, meaning thereby that you can go under Section 8 or file a civil suit for halting arbitration before it has initiated. You speculate that it may be initiated in the future, or it is going on and you want to stop that arbitration proceeding. That is known as anti-arbitration injunction. At what two instances can it be enforced? Before the arbitration has begun or during the arbitration proceedings. Now, there are two things that have to be seen. And many a times, if you read all these cases, and there are plethora of cases on this point, you will tend to confuse whether the court is saying that we have power or we don't have any power. What is the ultimate scenario that the court is trying to canvass? That's the first thing. Whether the Indian courts have a power to stop arbitration or not, that is the first question you have to ask yourself while reading the judgments. Not on what grounds can it be stopped. Not at all. If the court doesn't stops it, and if it doesn't stops it because the grounds are not met, that doesn't justify that they have commented upon power also. So you have to distinguish while reading all these cases whether the court has commented on the power to stop arbitrations. Number two, on what particular grounds. These are the two critical things that we will analyze in reference to these particular cases. Now let's come to the first case. Now this is a 2012 case. What happened is that there was a arbitration clause which was there in that particular agreement, and the parties stated that this particular agreement was an outcome of manipulation and fraud, and hence there exists no arbitration at all. Now it's a very small judgment. It's, I think, hardly 3 or 4 pages. You can even read it once. The relevant paras are 3, 4, and 5. Now, what happened in this case is that the Supreme Court said that anti-arbitration injunction is a concept not known to law, number one. Number two, that courts cannot injunct arbitrations because the arbitrator has the power to decide the question of validity under section 16. The court said that even though under section 8 the court can decide it, number one. Number two, yes, under section 9 of the CPC, you have the power, inherent power to file a suit. But taking the whole concept of arbitration law as well as the whole scheme of the Arbitration Act, it is visible that when power is given to the arbitrator to decide on the validity of that particular agreement and his jurisdiction, which is also known as competence, then the courts cannot decide it, and the courts cannot injunct an ongoing arbitration or stop a party from initiating an arbitration. This was in context of domestic awards, this first case, 2012. Then let's come to, before we go to the second two cases, we should come to National Aluminium Company Limited versus Subhash Infra Engineering Private Limited. This is a 2019 judgment, and mind you, this is also a very small judgment of 2-3 pages. This judgment expressly relies on the first judgment and says that domestic courts cannot stop an arbitration. Now, it seems to be very clear. There is an old case of 2012 and there is a new case of 2019 giving a clear logic that yes, domestic courts don't have power to stop an arbitration. Well, it's not that very simple, because there is one another case, that is Chatterjee Petroleum Company versus Haldia Petrochemicals Limited and World Sports Group versus MSM Satellite Singapore Private Limited. In both these cases, no doubt the court didn't grant anti-arbitration injunction, but they said that courts do have the power. They said that if you read section 5 of the Arbitration Act, it says that the courts have the power of intervention to the extent provided under this act. Therefore, if you file a case for stopping the parties from initiating arbitration or continuing arbitration, then you have to show, if it's a domestic arbitration, then you have to show that the arbitration agreement is not valid. If it is a foreign arbitration, then you have to show, according to section 45, that it is null, void, inoperative, or incapable of being performed. Right? Now, why this is important is because now there are two views. No doubt, I again submit that the grounds are very limited and the grounds have been strictly construed by the court. But still, there is a confusion whether the domestic courts have power or they don't have power. One case that I, by mistake, have missed out and I should discuss it right away is SBP's case. This is a case decided by a constitutional bench of 5 judges. And in that case, if you read the particular paragraphs that are in context of section 8, the court says that merely because the arbitrator is given the power to decide the dispute under section 16 of the Arbitration Act does not mean that the power of the court to decide whether the arbitration agreement is valid or not is taken away. So there is still a confusion, and I do admit that even my understanding of this is not very clear if I read the judgments, but I still hold the view that anti-arbitration injunctions can be given, but in rare of the rarest cases, when the grounds are fulfilled that are provided, and those are very strict interpretations. There are many judgments on anti-arbitration injunction, and you will hardly find a few in which injunction has been granted. Or if it was granted by the high courts, it was set aside by the Supreme Court. So that is the scenario of anti-arbitration injunctions. Now, there's one another thing I wanted to point you out. If you read section 8 along with section 11 of the Arbitration Act, you will see that under section 11, the word uses that the court is only required to see the existence of the arbitration agreement while appointing the arbitrator. Section 11 relates to appointment of arbitrators. Whereas in section 8, if you see, it says existence of a valid arbitration agreement. Why the word valid is there, that I am not still being able to appreciate. Because when something is void ab initio, it doesn't exist, then it's not the question of valid or invalid. It doesn't exist at all. So there's the existence of the arbitration agreement is at stake. So I don't understand, though the law commission recommended that the concept of existence of agreement, that amendment that is made under section 11, the very same principle should apply to section 8, but I don't understand why the word valid has been introduced, which will, I think, later be omitted by another amendment or maybe interpreted in a manner similar to section 11. Next slide, please. Oh, I just missed one case. I don't change the slide. That is the last case, McDonald's India Private Limited versus Vikram Bakshi. Interestingly, this judgment came before I joined Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, and I also worked on this matter, so I know this case. I have read each line of this particular judgment. Now, interestingly, this is one of the most amazing judgments that is written by the DB of the Delhi High Court. What happened is that Mr. Bakshi uh, uh, Mr. Bakshi filed a matter before the court saying that saying that injunction should be granted against the continuation of arbitration proceedings by McDonald's under LCIA at London. He said that that forum is very inconvenient to me. And because the clause provided that the courts in Delhi will have jurisdiction, therefore the court should decide the matter and hold that due to forum non-convenience, which is a concept that is applicable in anti-suit injunctions, should apply to anti-arbitration injunctions. Now, the single judge, interestingly, gave an injunction. Matter went to the DB. DB took a lot of time. And I must tell you that there was a proceeding filed before the Supreme Court also for directing the DB to deliver its judgment, but it was withdrawn again because by that time the DB gave its judgment, and it is a very interesting judgment. The court said that the concept of anti-suit injunction, one of the core concepts of that is the convenience of the parties, or a forum that is non-convenient for the parties. That concept will not apply to anti-arbitration injunction. There's a distinction between anti-suit injunction and anti-arbitration injunction. Let me tell you the reason why. The reason is that in anti-suit injunctions, both the courts, wherein let's suppose Delhi High Court as well as Calcutta High Court, both have jurisdiction. I stay in Delhi. I say that, see, I stay in Delhi. The parties, one of the offices is in Delhi. Why should a matter be filed in Kolkata? So let an injunction be given so that the matter is stopped there and I can do my matter here. So on the convenience of the parties, the court can say, okay, though the courts do respect committee of courts, but can say, okay, we are injuncting the matter, let the matter continue in Delhi. Now that is one aspect, because in this case, both the courts have jurisdiction. But in arbitration, it's not, the initial jurisdiction is not with the court. The courts may have supervisory jurisdiction, but the initial jurisdiction is not with the courts. It is with the arbitrator. So once you have agreed in the arbitration that you want to conduct it at London, then you can't later waive it saying that, no, I never agreed, or it is oppressive or vexatious against me. That can't be taken as a point at a later point of time, right? So the courts have made it clear that the principle of convenience of the party or forum non-convenience will not apply in anti-arbitration injunction, and that can only apply to anti-suit injunctions. Next slide, please. Now, these are few important cases, and we will discuss can writ proceedings be initiated against arbitration proceedings? Now, see, this is, I was doing a matter very recently, and I came across, I knew SBP judgment and Lalit Kumar's judgment because they both are of the Supreme Court, 2005 and 2014. In both these cases, the courts have clearly held that the high courts under 226 and 227, even though these are constitutional powers and the court can very well injunct an arbitration, but they shouldn't taking into consideration the overall scheme of the Arbitration Act. Now, the two judgments, the citation, relevant paragraphs are 45, 46, and Lalit Kumar's judgment is para 8. But when I did a deeper research into this aspect, there were various other judgments by the Gujarat High Court and Bombay High Court which have distinguished SBP and said that SBP only relates to the intervention by the court. It stops intervention by court on an ongoing arbitration proceeding. But supposedly, if the arbitration proceeding has come to an end, for example, no award is passed and to be challenged under Section 34, but supposedly the arbitrators have terminated the proceedings illegally, not illegally, improperly. In that case, the parties are left with no choice. Where will the parties go? If the award is not passed and the proceedings are terminated under Section 32, in that case, a writ petition will lie, even though the Arbitration Act is a complete code. But I must again submit that all these judgments, which I'm referring to, though not pointed out here, are all Bombay High Court and Gujarat High Court judgments, though they have distinguished SBP. But as the law now stands, that if an arbitration proceeding is going on and the other party files a writ, the court will say that please go and appear before the arbitrator, raise all the objections you want before the arbitrator, don't come to writ courts. That is what has been stated in these two judgments. Now we were discussing Section 8. Now in Section 8, I told you that you should mark the words that the party should submit before the first statement of defense or at the time of first statement of defense. Now, what does that first statement of defense word means? It means that when you submit your response on the merits of the matter, then you have to point out that this particular suit is not maintainable and the party should be referred to arbitration. Let's take an example. Supposedly, there is a suit filed by a party despite there being an arbitration clause in the agreement. You have an objection against it. You object it, but you don't object it under your application under Order 7 Rule 11, saying that this court does not have jurisdiction. You also comment about the matter why the court does not have jurisdiction, but don't disclose the factum about the arbitration agreement or the fact that this matter should be referred to arbitration. You don't say it in your Order 7 Rule 11 application. Now that particular application was on the merits of the case, and that is why you were obliged to point out as to why this particular suit is not maintainable. Supposedly, in that case, you didn't say it in that application, but ultimately you said it. Ultimately, you said the same thing in your WS. Now the Act, specifically Section 8, does not uses the word written statement. See, written statement is not something that we lawyers have created. It's provided under CPC. Pleadings are defined as including plain and written statement. So written statement is expressly not used. It says first statement of defense, means statement that you make on the merits of the matter to show why the suit is not maintainable. In that only you have to claim that this is not maintainable because the subject matter should be referred to arbitration. Let's come to the another case. That is branch manager Magma Leasing Finance Limited versus Potluri Madhvilata and others. Now, this is a 2009 case. Interestingly, what happened is that the party objected, saying that there is an arbitration agreement and this matter should be referred to arbitration. But it failed to produce the original arbitration agreement or certified copy of it, despite being asked by the court. The court said that if you don't produce, the requirements under subclause 2 of section 8 are not fulfilled, and hence your application under section 8 subclause 1 is not maintainable. That's why as a practicing lawyers or people who are going to practice law should remember that under section 8, whenever you raise an objection, you see two things. If the original arbitration agreement is already there in the suit filed, the plaint that has been filed, the documents that have been filed along with the plaint, you may or may not file it, saying that it is already filed by the plaintiff. But if it is not there and you have to show that there is a arbitration agreement, then you should file it along with the application or your written statement, as the case may be, showing the certified or original copy of the arbitration agreement. Now, one thing more, supposedly you have not filed any application before the court under section 8, but you have stated that in your WS that this matter should be referred to arbitration. In that case also, the court will refer the matter to arbitration if it finds a valid arbitration agreement, and no formal application is required by the parties to submit a particular dispute. No formal application is required under section 8 to be filed before the court. So that you should remember. Now let's come to two other interesting cases that is a formal application required under section 8, which I was talking to you like some time back. Now the first case, this is the case that I was referring yesterday. This is one of the interesting opinions that are written by Justice Mukta Gupta. That is Dharmaveer Khosla versus Asian Hotels. This is a 2020 case, very recent. Now in this judgment, Justice Mukta Gupta pointed out that there is no requirement to file a formal application. Even if you on the first date of hearing submit that this matter should be referred to arbitration, you have brought in the notice of the judge that this matter should be referred to arbitration. And therefore, if you don't file your application or you miss filing an application, in that case, it won't create any difficulty because you have already brought in the attention of the judge that this matter should be referred to arbitration. So this is a very recent judgment. This is, I believe this is an extension, though it is not expressly stated under the act, but she has interpreted section 8 saying that the word shall means the court have to send it. And it is just the requirement of parties filing the arbitration agreement and making and taking such an objection is just to ensure that the court knows that this is an arbitrable matter. That is the only purpose of that is provided under section 1 and subsection 1 and subsection 2 of section 8. This is an extension, though not provided under law, but very recent judgment and good. The second judgment is even more interesting. That is Holdings versus Ambience Private Limited. Now, in this case, what happened is that a suit was filed, and in the written statement, the defendant did not expressly state that this matter should be referred to arbitration, but said that this court does not have the jurisdiction to continue with the suit, and this matter should be referred to arbitration. This was not expressly stated, but he stated that this court lacks jurisdiction to decide this particular matter. Now, the arbitration agreement was also filed by the court before the court by the party. Now, the court said that you are not required to express in too many words that this is an arbitrable dispute. Even on the reading of the written statement, the preliminary objection, if it is evident that what you wanted to say is that this court does not have jurisdiction because there is an arbitration agreement, that is sufficient. You are not required to explain the clause. You are not required to extract the clause, pull out the clause, present it before the court. Not at all. If you miss it, nothing to worry. The court will take into consideration that you have brought to the judicial notice of the court that there is an arbitration agreement. So these are few cases that are relevant and important to section 8. Next slide, please. Now we come to the main section, section 7. Now yesterday I have discussed with you few concepts regarding section 7 when I was discussing you about the ingredients of an arbitration agreement. Today we will just see the section, touch the section, understand few case laws on this very particular aspect. Now the first case, the arbitration agreement is defined under section 7. So it starts in this part. Arbitration agreement means an agreement by the parties to submit to arbitration all or certain disputes which have arisen or which may arise between them in respect of a defined legal relationship, whether contractual or not. Now let's pause here for a second. First, what does it say? An agreement by the parties to submit to arbitration, meaning thereby that there has to be an agreement by the parties. The parties have to agree for arbitration. The second phrase used is all or certain disputes, meaning thereby that supposedly a contract provides n number of provisions. If you want, you can avoid certain disputes and you can say that these certain disputes will not be adjudicated by the arbitral tribunal. You are free to do that. You are free to define the jurisdiction of the arbitral tribunal. You are free to provide which of the disputes can be referred to arbitration under the arbitration agreement. That you are free to do. Then, which have arisen or which may arise between. Have arisen means submission agreement, as I told you yesterday. The disputes have already arisen. The parties want to submit it to arbitration, so they file a submission agreement. They make a submission agreement and enter. Other thing is, which may arise between, meaning thereby future disputes which can arise. For that reason, the arbitration clause as well as arbitration agreement is provided. Then, let's come to the second clause. An arbitration agreement may be in form of an arbitration clause in the contract or in form of a separate agreement. We discussed it yesterday that there are two manners in which the arbitration agreement is made. Number one, there can be an arbitration clause in the contract itself, meaning thereby a contract which is relating to a construction activity between the parties. There in the contract, they can provide an arbitration clause, or they can have a separate arbitration agreement altogether. Means the contract is different, the substantive contract is different, and the arbitration agreement is different. The third is an arbitration agreement shall be in writing. So I have told you the New York Convention, the UNCITRAL model law, all requires it to be in writing. Now, fourth is very important because this was something that was considered by the Supreme Court at length. An arbitration agreement is in writing if it contains in a document signed by the parties, an exchange of letters, telex, telegrams, or other means of communication. Now see the green highlighted part that was brought by the way of amendment in 2016, including communication through electronic means which provide a record of the agreement. So this particular aspect, including communication through electronic means, this was added by way of amendment. Right? An exchange of statements of statement of claim and defense in which the existence of arbitration agreement is alleged and the party does not deny it. Meaning thereby that it will be deemed that the arbitration agreement is in writing if it is signed by parties, or by reading of the exchange of letters, telegrams, and other means of communication, it is clear that there is something in writing in form of an arbitration agreement or arbitration clause. That's the only thing required. You may not have signed it, but it will be considered to be in writing. Third thing is that when a statement of claim is filed, along with that arbitration agreement is also filed, and you don't object to it, then it is admitted that you have accepted it, that there is an arbitration agreement. The last thing is that the difference in a contract. Now, this is what I was talking to you about yesterday. Incorporation by way of reference. Supposedly one agreement, arbitration agreement, or any other contract refers to another agreement which has an arbitration clause, in that case, if it was the intention of the parties and if visible from the reading of the document that the second document wants to apply the arbitration clause in the first document, then automatically that particular clause in the first agreement will be applicable to the second agreement. Now, next slide, please. Now, these are the few cases that we will discuss, and I'll tell you very in short fashion what was the proposition here and what the court held. The first case is Rukmani Bai versus collector. In this case, what happened is that there was a clause which provided that all disputes will be referred to the lessor and the lessor decision shall be binding. The word arbitration or arbitration agreement was not used at all. The question was whether such an agreement is an arbitration agreement. The court held that it is an arbitration agreement. You're not required to say that it is an arbitration agreement or you should use the word arbitration or arbitrators. You're not required to. If from the reading of the particular clause it seems that number one, you want to refer the disputes to a third party, and number two, that you want to be bound by the decision of that third party, then it is an arbitration agreement. Second case also says that mere usage of the term arbitration and arbitrators will make an agreement, will not, I think word not is missing, will not make an agreement an arbitration agreement if it provides for fresh consent of the parties to refer the disputes to arbitration. So what happened in this case also is that there was a particular agreement which provided that the parties will refer their disputes to arbitration subject to a fresh consent by the parties. In the arbitration agreement, there was no mandate that was provided that the disputes will be referred to arbitrator. It said that in future, if the dispute arises, then the parties will consent whether they want to go for arbitration or not. The court said that such type of agreement is merely an agreement to enter into an arbitration agreement in the future, and it is not an arbitration agreement at all. Then third case is if an arbitration agreement is not consented by the parties and from the correspondences it is evident that parties were in negotiation, then there's no arbitration agreement. Now, the facts of this case was that there was active negotiation between two parties, and from the correspondences it was not clear whether the parties have accepted the arbitration agreement or not. The ad item was not very clear from the correspondences between the parties. The court said that there is no consent of the parties, and therefore even if there is an arbitration clause, it doesn't seem that the parties have accepted it, and hence there is no arbitration agreement at all. Now, the next case is, in the same case, another aspect that was dealt herein was that even after termination of the main contract, the arbitration clause survives. So even if the main contract is terminated, the arbitration will survive. Then the principle of severability, I have explained you yesterday that even if the main contract is void, the arbitration agreement will continue. You have to show why the arbitration agreement itself was void from the very inception, means void ab initio. It's the responsibility of you to show. If it is not, then the arbitration agreement is valid, and the arbitral tribunal under the principle of competence under section 16, which we will discuss in the another lectures that we'll be conducting, can decide its very jurisdiction. Then doctrine of incorporation by way of reference, we discussed this yesterday. I'm not going to repeat it again. The basic principle is that the court in MR Engineering have made it clear that if the first contract has an arbitration clause and the second contract merely refers to the first contract without referring to the arbitration clause in particular, then the second contract will not be governed by arbitration and the parties cannot be referred to arbitration, right? So this was MR Engineers, but in Inox Wind Limited, which is a very recent case decided by the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court has opined that when standard form of contracts are employed, which are between professional persons and trade associations, in that case, even if there is no specific reference to the arbitration clause in the mother agreement, still it will apply because the court has applied standard form of contract doctrine, saying that usually contracts are made in a standard fashion and it is always the intention of the parties to be bound by arbitration. but they are reluctant to do so when a dispute arises. That's the reason given by the court. However, as I have told you yesterday, I'm not in very much favor of this particular judgment because this is can be misused a lot. And I think very strict interpretation should be given to this judgment. Next slide, please. Now, this I think is the last slide which we will be covering. Will the arbitration agreement survive even when the parties die? The answer is yes. That is provided under section 40. Section 80, I guess, which says that even if one of the parties die, the arbitration agreement will survive. Now, there are two cases, Ravi Prakash Goel and Jyoti Gupta, wherein what happened is both the cases were very similar in facts. There was a partnership. One of the partners died. Their legal heirs uh, initiated an arbitration proceeding against the rest of the partners. The rest of the partners said that, see, this partner was only a part of the, what do I say, partnership. This partner was the partner who is dead, their father was a signatory to the agreement, and they are not signatories, the legal heirs. So they can't initiate an action against the other partners. The court said that no, even if the party dies, the arbitration agreement survives. Same logic has been applied in other cases also, that even if the contract has come to an end, the arbitration agreement will still survive, and it depends upon the disputes that are alleged. For example, there's a particular contract which requires you to do something. You do the act. After the act is done, NOC is given, everything is done and dusted. After 10 to 15 days, it is found that you have not done the work properly. They want to initiate arbitration. You say that the contract has already terminated, it has come to an end. Why? How can you initiate an action against me? To that, the court will say that no, the intention of the dispute herein is that you have not done a quality work on that particular thing, and they are seeking damages, and therefore this arbitration agreement will be active. So this is one thing. Then condition precedents before arbitration to be performed. Now, in many contracts, usually before arbitration is initiated, there is a particular clause that is provided and that has to be adhered to. For example, it may provide that first you will submit your claims before the settlement officer. The settlement officer will scrutinize your claims, will try to appreciate whether the claims have merits or not. And if he doesn't, then you may refer to arbitration. Now, if you don't do the former condition, you can't initiate arbitration. And this is very recently said by United Indian Insurance Company Limited versus Hyundai Engineering. Very similar were the facts, wherein you had to first give all the papers and submit your dispute on the disputed claim to the insurance officer, and then only you could have initiated arbitration. But they directly initiated arbitration, because of which this judgment came. The court said that preconditions have to be followed. But supposedly it says that first the parties will reconcile the dispute, will sit together, peacefully decide what way out can be taken, and then one should initiate arbitration. In that case, the court has said that when the parties are at odd with each other, there's hardly a possibility that the parties will cooperate with each other and get a beneficial result which will be benefiting both of them. So in that case, it's a very empty formality and can be neglected, and people can straightforward start arbitration. Right? Next slide. This is the end. Thank you. And that's all for today. Tomorrow, we will be discussing arbitrability of disputes, because that is an aspect which I should have discussed now, but I knew that it's going to take a lot of time, this particular aspect that I've discussed today. So tomorrow, we will be discussing that along with the interim relief under Section 9 and Section 11 of the Arbitration Act. Now I'm open to questions you may ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was an insightful session. So moving to the Q&A session, sir, you have almost covered everything. So if you feel any question has been covered, you can let me know.
I beg your pardon if.
Sir, you have almost covered all the questions. So if you feel
Okay.
any question has been covered, you can just let me know. I'm taking
Okay.
which are different from the lecture. So first question is, what is the relevance of seat and venue debate in the era of globalization?
Okay, so see, seat and venue debate will now it has crystallized, but a few years back it was a big debate, and there's a reason for that debate. See, seat will confer supervisory jurisdiction on a court. Now, a party who is a citizen, for example, who lives in Delhi, will always want that the seat of arbitration should be Delhi. Though he may claim that no, even if the arbitration was done in Bombay, but still the seat was New Delhi, he will always try to enforce that. So that is precisely the reason why seat is so important, because it gives supervisory jurisdiction to a court. No one wants a supervisory jurisdiction to a foreign court, especially an Indian party. And that is why all these disputes have arisen. No doubt, a supervisory court could have done the same job as would have done by the domestic court. But we Indians do have a trust problem. So that's why seat is having such a prevalence, and there are so many cases on that. But yes, seat is very important because of two factors: supervisory jurisdiction of the court, and number two, that you may, for your own convenience, have arbitration at various places. You may conduct it in Goa if you like, you may conduct it in Mumbai, you may conduct it 10 various places. But will all the high courts in those 10 states will have jurisdiction? It is in order to avoid such a situation that seat is one, venue can be many, right? And as far as the seat and venue discussion is concerned, when we will be discussing the rest of the sections, I think it's section 26, when we'll be discussing that, then we will be dealing with the seat venue discussion in quite a detail. We will be discussing all the case laws then. Okay, any other question?
So thank you, sir. So there's one more question. So whether limitation for filing of the written statement as prescribed in the CPC and also the Commercial Codes Act 2015 would be applicable to the filing of a Section 8 application?
Very good question. I think I missed this point, though I have read. I think it is Justice Muralidhar's judgment or Justice Endlaw's judgment. I can't recollect. I've read it very recently, wherein the court said that after this amendment has been made to Section 8, though the content of the right has not changed, but if your in commercial suits, your time for filing the WS maximum time was 120 days, and you have not filed your WS nor made an application under Section 8, then it will be time barred. You have to submit it to the jurisdiction of the court. I think it is Justice Muralidhar's judgment while he was interpreting the judgments of the Supreme Court in context of the amendment that has taken place to the Arbitration Act under Section 8, Subclause 1. I'll tell the judgment tomorrow, because this is a very relevant point and also a very relevant question.
Thank you so much, sir. So if you have like 5 minutes, can I take two more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question is, there's a participant asking, can transfer petition be filed regarding the venue of arbitration?
I didn't get that question. I'm so sorry. Transfer petition be filed for
Be
venue.
filed regarding the venue of arbitration.
How will you file transfer petition for venue? Venue is upon the parties. It is upon the arbitrators. They can decide where they want to. Supposedly, I'll tell you an example. Seat of arbitration is New Delhi, but New Delhi is too hot. So I want the venue of arbitration to be Mumbai. The other party also agrees. The arbitrator says, okay, fine, we have no problem. Let's go to Mumbai. Then we go to Mumbai, then that becomes the venue of arbitration. But supposedly there are too many COVID cases rising. You want to do it in Goa now. You can go to Goa if you want to. And if you want to be the safest and you want to go to New Zealand, you can even go to New Zealand. There's no difficulty in venue. Venue is decided by the parties. Venue can be any number, anywhere, any place. But the seat of the arbitration is one. That's it. Seat of arbitration cannot be changed. Venue of arbitration can be.
Thank you so much, sir. I'll just take the last question because we are running out of time. Sir, can arbitration agreements be made in non-commercial civil disputes?
That's a good question. See, the meaning of the word, the phrase that is used under Section 7 is commercial or otherwise. Now, the courts have said that arbitration can be conducted in commercial and even in civil disputes which resemble some form of commerciality. But commerciality as an aspect is not required. It is just required that it should be a civil dispute and should not be a prohibited factors which makes the dispute non-arbitrable. Now, in detail, this particular question is quite relevant. When we'll be discussing tomorrow about arbitrability of disputes, we'll be discussing this aspect also.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you for a knowledgeable session. So, is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up?
Whether Section 8 is available to appellate courts to no, Section 8 is to be filed in the suit that is filed in the original jurisdiction. Why supervisory jurisdiction of court doctrine is not applicable to Section 9 application, though Section 9 uses the word court, which is defined in the Act. See, Section 9 is for a different purpose. The purpose of Section 9 is to secure a property. Now, this question also I'll be answering tomorrow. Don't worry. We'll be dealing Section 9 and Section 17. We'll be doing this. Don't worry on that. I think I have answered all the questions, so it's all done.
Yes, sir, you have. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Aishwari, sir. We are truly humbled by your numerous insightful contribution to this lecture. And I would also like to thank everyone for being a part of this lecture today. We hope to see you all tomorrow for tomorrow's session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much.